Fanatic is a word that describes many in the 40k universe, but none more so than the word-bearers, devoted servants of the dark gods who travel the dangerous path of chaos with unwavering devotion under the guidance of their Primarch Lorgar. This legion has brought destruction and calamity to the worlds of the Imperium time and again. However, in the early days of the Great Crusade, they were known for being very slow, since after each conquest, the Primarch of the Word-Bearers had his sons spread the message that the Emperor was the divine savior of humanity, and there was a period of reconsecration and construction of monuments in his father's honor. This conflicted with the Emperor's own ideals. The Master of Humanity forbade such irrational thoughts with his imperial truth. There would be no blind faith. Because of this and his frustration with the slowness of the word-bearers, he publicly reprimanded the legion in the city of Monarchia in front of the Ultramarines. Monarchia was now a ruin, but it had been considered perfect by Lorgar and his sons, and a sanctuary for the Emperor. His main advisors, Erebus and Cor Farron, among others, turned his pain into hatred, turning Lorgar away from the Emperor and leading him into the arms of the ruinous powers. The word-bearers not only sided with Horus during the heresy, but orchestrated the Master's corruption. From there, they were free to begin their purpose, to ignite chaos. Cults in countless worlds after the heresy. Lorgar would ascend to demonhood blessed by the four gods of chaos, and, his devotion rewarded, he retired to the Templum in Physio on the demon world of Zakaris. It seemed like an eternity had passed since the blessed Lorgar had moved away from his legion. Thousands of years had passed since the golden-skinned demon Primarch had isolated himself in the Templum in Physio, forbidding anyone from disturbing his meditations. Great was the lament among the hosts when the holy demon Primarch had made his will known, for they had never been without the glorified one, known among the warrior brothers as Lorgar. Surrounded by a desert of bones, the Templum in Physio had been built by 8 million slave adepts, all of whom had given their lives to complete it, staining the stones of the temple with their blood. The voices of the legion rose as one in mourning, and the great doors of the Templum were sealed, never to be opened again until Lorgar's vigil was over. Centuries turned into millennia, but every day hundreds of thousands of blood candles were still lit in the name of Lorgar. His name was whispered by the tortured lips of 10 million penitents who prayed for his return. So, how is evil really defined in Warhammer 40k? Oh, let's see. I can answer this because I've thought about it for a minute. Of all things, and in the dark and terrifying future that terrifies you, you have the Night Lords, the Dark Eldar, and all that kind of stuff. They're scary, but not necessarily in the sense that they've crossed the boundaries of evil, because the Night Lords know in their hearts, even in the story of Adalos, that if you're new and listening to Warhammer, it's a very good book of the Night Lords trilogy, and that series is great too. Follow, they know they're wrong, and not everyone makes great decisions. The Dark Eldar, the Drukhari, are sort of forced to carry out these horrible things. Considering YouTube, we can't exactly say what they do, but it's something terrible. They monetize the videos, yes. And if they do horrible things, it's because, in a way, they're trying to prevent Slanesh from devouring their souls. The word-bearers are the most evil of all, in my opinion, because they choose it, and in their own paradigm and worldview, they believe they're the good guys. That's why, yes, I have to fundamentally disagree with you. Go ahead, because yes, the Night Lords, everything related to them, even if you tell us that the Night Lords know they are wrong and continue to do things that make them more evil, not less. Because I'm going to say that the perception I have of evil in this specific context is that it is doing things that are not necessary for your survival and that horribly affect people. That is exactly the case with what the Night Lords do. That is evil. An interesting point, what I would say even in our world, is that a soldier who follows orders, is he more evil than someone who believes he is doing the right thing, but therefore is? Which is the one that appears in the last book of the church. I think the Emperor talks about one of the leaders who led a terrible inquisition in an earlier era and said that he died with a smile on his face knowing that he had served his God. And that is what happens to us, that the person who knows that he is doing evil is still, in a way, morally conflicted, but continues to do evil. The person who is truly evil does not encounter a moral obstacle. He simply throws himself at it, especially the word-bearers, who believe they're doing the right thing. I think the comparison with the Night Lords becomes very interesting because the Night Lords, to talk a little about them, are a faction that one of the reasons why Conrad Kurz despises his entire legion is because they end up sending a bunch of criminals to become recruits of the Night Lords. So they're the people he despises from his home world, and they're all evil. Conrad destroyed his home world. He rejects the Emperor's love immediately. The word-bearers think, as of today, the only thing that redeems them a little is that, in my opinion, the Emperor treats them very badly because they come from a religious world of fanatics, which it must be recognized was not God's fault, but it seems that the gods of chaos wanted Lorgar to fall into the hands of the Emperor. And then, instead of rejecting Lorgar's religion at that time, after Monarchia, they said, well, let's put 10 custodians on him and he'll be fine. It's a terrible plan, and I think, honestly, throughout most of the book, Lorgar is trying to do something, because you have to admit there's something more there. We'll put 10 custodians on him, and he'll be fine. It seems like a terrible plan, and honestly, I think throughout most of the book, Lorgar is out there trying to say, you know, there has to be something more in the galaxy. There has to be some primordial truth. The primordial truth is not an evil term at first. It's like there has to be a supreme being, because every person, each and every person we meet, has that supreme being, so surely they exist in some form. What I would add at the end is that, arguably, after everything that happens, Lorgar is right about practically everything. Oh, this is debatable. I mean, yes, it's a yes and a no. It's a yes or a no. I would reject it because it seems like a very interesting point to me. It's the kind of comment I get a lot on YouTube, like the Emperor was basically a liar because the imperial truth is wrong. Lorgar is right because there are gods of chaos. But the point is that the Emperor keeps screwing up because he doesn't explain it to Lorgar. But in the Emperor's eyes, he hasn't lied because the gods of chaos are not gods for him, and later, in the Horus Heresy, we discover that for almost all the perpetuals they are not gods, but incredibly powerful beings, and the Emperor is very distrustful of them. Of course, he doesn't like to betray them easily. Well, this is what we have to do. Take a step back in the discussion and define for ourselves how we define what a god is. It's a great question. Yes, a great question. It depends, I guess. Well, I guess we'll go straight to the word-bearer stories. But I'm going to end with that point where I would say I wouldn't define something as a god when it's linked to the will of something else. The gods of chaos are, in my opinion, conscious emotions merged into a being that cannot turn around and make the decision not to do what it does. Khorne is not a god, is he? They are forces of nature. They are very similar to the four horsemen of the apocalypse in Warhammer, in a way. Technically speaking, not all gods are avatars of something, such as the Hindu god Lakshmi, who is the goddess of good fortune. She cannot turn around and say, no, today I am not going to give good luck. Today I'm going to war, or they could, I would say they could have the option, their free will. I don't think that in a way someone is a god all the time. They're known for something in many mythologies, like Loki is a trickster, but at any moment Loki could have the free choice to say today, I'm not going to do any of that. Khorne can't not be Khorne, yes, but Thor's the god of thunder. He can't not be like today. I am the god of rain. That is not how the gods work. I feel that he is going to be a god of something new, but he is free will. I'm sorry. That's all. We should go into details because that is the main topic today, but the title of this video does not lie. Let's talk about Lorgar and the word-bearers. In many ways, people consider them the great evil of 40k. I suppose that one thing that they have about the Lords of the Night is that, in terms of prominence, I would say that they are more of an antagonist, the definitive antagonist of the scenario, and in terms of being the true great evil. As you know, we're going to talk more about Erebus, of course, later, because it is very fun to hate him. He sees himself as the true architect of chaos, which is actually the title he uses sometimes, and there are good reasons to think that. There is also something that I wanted to point out, because there's a new series of 40k books called The Dawn of Fire, which Black Library has said will be like the Horus Heresy of 40k, and we have already had enough of those. The word-bearers appear in several of those books. They're behind many really sinister things that are happening in the galaxy, and even Abaddon's agents do not seem to appear so much in those books. But we have clearly seen the error buses planning something very big in what we are working on in the scenario. So I think it is a good topic of conversation because it is possible that the word bearers will gain a lot of prominence in the books in the coming years, which will be exciting. But before talking about Erebus, let's talk about Lorgar. When Lorgar lands on Cultures, his planet, he is found by a tribe, and then later he is found by Cor Theron, an exiled priest, and Logan becomes very fond of Corthera, and the Emperor does not prevent it. But Primarch talks a lot about it, and many of his Space Marines end up talking about it, because Lorgar's attachment to Cortheron is really quite unhealthy later, when Lorgar begins to doubt whether he should betray the Emperor. Cool Theron tells him, "You are my son, not the Emperor," and this has a great influence on him. Lorgar admits that. I think he calls him my boy, or something like that, or my son, and that really starts affecting him. I would say that in a way, Lorgar is a victim, but in the sense that he sees himself as a victim, and yet he's also a victim. So he has a strange dynamic between having really suffered something and, at the same time, perceiving suffering at an irrational level. I agree with you to some extent, but I would say that the relationship and how it is explored between Theron and Lorgar in the Lorgar Primarch novel is absolutely fascinating, because it shows that the depth of the relationship between them is not so one-sided, that it is always great that Theron hits, abuses, and manipulates the guy of the law. Because there are parts of the story in which I do not remember the name of the character from whose perspective much of the story is told. But basically he tells Lorgar, Coran and those religious extremists, they're manipulating you. That is how they try to do it. You should side with us. And Lorgar turns to him and says, "Okay, I know what they're doing, and I'm going to play along. If I did what you say, I would be being manipulated by you." And the guy has no answer for Lorgar, because he thinks, damn, he's right. The only reason I want him on my side is because he is big and powerful and that he will do what we want politically. So I think Lorgar fundamentally understands that he is a Primarch. He knows exactly what Cool Farn is doing. I just think their values coincide in many ways. Music, do you think he knows exactly what Cor Theron is doing? Because the manipulation of Erebus and Cor Theron after Monarchia is something that has a huge impact, and yes, they put Logo on the pilgrimage that eventually leads them to their fall. I think he knows what is happening, but it also highlights one of his fundamental weaknesses, which is that the Guardians of the Law need to believe, even despite the Emperor of all his just core and of all the gods of chaos that are here, is like an innate ability in him, in which he's like, I just need to follow something and be on the path to serve, but follow, and that is one of his true wings. I am not sure that it is just that. I think it is fundamentally a little deeper than that. I think Logan has a fundamental need to belong, as if he always needed to be part of something, and I think that by his nature, he says it constantly. In the books, there is constant talk of how Logan is, in essence, in many ways, the kindest Primarch naturally. He is not a general by nature. He cares about people as much as he can. In general, he is portrayed as a nice guy who got involved in things he should not. He is not supposed to be a ruthless general on the battlefield. So I think he tries to attract people and unite them as much as he can. I think that is where much of his perspective comes from, and he also values kindness in his legionaries a lot. Like, one of the reasons why he is such a fan of Argo Tau in the books is because the Tau guy is like he, has a lot of compassion. He says that makes him worthy of a lot. But sorry, let me go back to the cultures for a second, because one of the things that is really important in the Lorgar Primarch novel are these religious wars that take place, and Logan has visions of the Emperor, or at least of a golden figure that approaches, and when the Emperor arrives, he immediately swears allegiance to him. And this is a bit tangential, but I found it very interesting. One of the really interesting things about the cultures is that the legends speak of 4 gods, and they are very similar, but their names are very similar, so it is clear who they're talking about. However, what I find interesting is that Slaanesh is mentioned, and one of the things that you hear about sometimes in the theories, and that is referred to in terms like the Dark King, is this idea that if a god is going to exist technically, he has already existed because the warp is not limited by time and space like our reality, and this is a kind of proof of it, because Slaanesh have legends of Slaanesh before his Great Crusade, and therefore they have legends of Slaanesh before Slaanesh technically existed. When they commit these religious wars in which millions of people die in the name of what eventually becomes the Emperor, and the Emperor properly repudiates this cult to him in the cultures from the beginning, and that is the first great mistake that the Emperor makes. Lorgar and the Word-Bearers then pursue the Great Crusade, as all the legions do, but the Word-Bearers are very slow. And the reason is that they spend a lot of time instilling faith in the Emperor and the divinity of the Master of Humanity. And, in fact, the religion that will one day dominate the Empire slows them down so much that, eventually, the Emperor decides to intervene, and from my point of view, Monarchia is again very poorly managed. Word-Bearers, listen to me well. You, among all my legions, are guilty of failing. You are more warriors than any other legion, except the 13th, but your conquests are the slowest, and your victories sound hollow. You remain in docile worlds for years after the final victory, leading the population to the worship of a false faith and sowing cults among the naive and the deceived, erecting monuments to the lie. Everything you have done in the Great Crusade has been in vain, while everyone else has been successful and has brought prosperity to the Imperium. Only you have failed me. Wage the war for which you were created. Serve the Imperium for what you were born. Carry with you the lesson learned here today. Kneel in the ruin that lies at the end of a false path. May this be the rebirth of your legion. It was described as a perfect city. The Ultramarines tell everyone that they must evacuate the city and then they raise it. There's only one survivor who will talk about it later, and the Ultramarines are incredibly ruthless in this. One of the things that the Ultra allow, there is a single survivor who will talk about it later, and the Ultramarines are incredibly ruthless in this. And one of the things that the Ultra allow them to do is send a distress signal so that the Word-Bearers attack. And of course, they naturally assume that the Ultramarines could be traitors, but then Gilman communicates by the Vox and says, yes, come and land. And they land. And what is really strange is that the Emperor is not there at first, so there are only Gil Lyman, the Ultramarines, and Malcador. Gilman says very little. Malcolor tries to teach him the error of his ways, but the Emperor is not there. So what is the plan at this moment? How does anyone think this is going to change the mindset of the logo? Yes, what really catches my attention about all this, and I think it is something that not many people have taken into account in this conversation, is the fact that I think we assume that, as it is the first time that we see Lorgar being reprimanded on screen, it is the first time that they reprimand him the first conversation, not the straw that breaks the camel's back. Everything that happens surprises me a lot. For the love of God, I have told you so many times that now I'm going to have to punish you. Yes, it is a very valid argument, and I think it is fair. The point is that it seems reasonable to me to assume that not much has happened before this, based solely on Lorgar's reaction, and nothing is referenced during this time. In fact, Logan mentions that the Emperor was worshipped in the carriages, so it seems that yes. I understand that you could be right, and maybe they will clarify in the future, but I get the impression that it is the first time they have talked about it. But I understand what you are saying. I think the way they try to explain it is that the logo was found, I think, in the middle of the package or relatively late, towards the end of the discovery of the other Primarchs. And it can be deduced by the meeting of the Emperor with the subsequent Primarchs, something like, very well, you are ready to move forward with the story, because the Emperor in the book The Master of Mankind. They even ask him why he tries to conquer the galaxy so fast, and he answers that it is because of how he sees the future, that he sees so many futures that it is almost as if he did not see it, because there are so many possibilities, but he can see the final goal and needs to reach it very quickly, and obviously, without revealing much, we do not want to talk about the great plan of the Emperor. But he needs to conquer the galaxy quickly, and that is why he turns a blind eye to Conrad Kurz. That is why he, in a way, lets the legions do what they want, because, again, it does not matter, because the final goal for them is that all humanity is completely captured within the Imperium, which is the final goal, instead of them being, obedient and captured, so that there are no other humans outside the control of the Emperor. And I think that, again, they were kind of logos that captured worlds. I think they only capture worlds. They do not kill anyone. 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 They do not kill is actually the final goal. Instead of them being, obedient and captured, so that there are no other humans outside the control of the Emperor. And I think that, again, they were like logos capturing worlds. That is, I think they only look at it when he says something like, "You are being a little slow, dude. What's up?" Have you taken your smoothie this morning, or something like that? But that is the only time they really check it, because most of the legions are in fleets that do not stop. They keep going. Obviously, Logo stayed a little longer, everything got more complicated, and they even made them stay behind him. They created a monarchy. What we said before was a perfect city. It is the perfect city from the point of view of the word-bearers at that time, which is that there are churches and cathedrals dedicated to the emperor, so they did not have any problem until they really discovered that this is what you were doing and that these people are going to be a problem. And that is when, as I said, my personal theory intervenes, which I think I mentioned before in this channel. And that is that I think the emperor was limited by two dates, which were the birth of Sinesh and the rise of Lorgar Aurelian. He needed to go from starting the Great Crusade to having a force strong enough to destroy the orcs in a short time. At that time, he is supposed to be a general, and that is what the emperor needs. All the Primarchs are designed to perform different functions in the future. That is what will end up happening, but Lorgar right now needs to be a general, and that is what has gotten him into trouble, the fact of hindering the timeline of the Great Crusade. And I think that even Malcador says that Lorgar is his favorite, not in the sense that he is his favorite, but Malcador says that I think he just felt bad because Lorgar was one of those who could not be redeemed, because I think that, in a way, they thought that Lorgar would be a kind of charismatic public figure, and that is why they needed to correct his behavior. I mean, that's why I think I don't disagree with that premise, because I think you could be right that that was the idea, but I think it goes back more to how Lorgar was handled so badly. So the first thing Lorgar does after Monarchia, as is very famous, is to get angry. He gets angry for a long time. Yes, control of the Legion is given to Corps Fair, which is essentially not a space marine. So it does not say it. It is not that fast, but I think there could have been much better ways to change Lorgar. The Emperor has dealt with religion for thousands of years. He knows how people will react when you tell them that their religion is not true. Well, when I spoke before about Lorgar's weakness, I did not think the Emperor took much into account the one I mentioned about his need to follow, because the Emperor, like us, has not mentioned it yet. But in Monarchia, they raised the city, they raised the barriers, they all gathered in the fields on the ashes of their greatest creation, and he forced them to kneel before the Emperor, and at that time, he has not mentioned it yet. But in Monarchia, they raised the city, the word-bearers, gathered in their entirety in the fields, in the ashes of their greatest creation, and he psychically forces them to kneel before the Emperor. And at this point, you are thinking, is he not simply posing as a god before them? Well, we will talk about his perception of the Emperor even after this, but his demonstration here aims to show you that you want a god, hear a god, and that God forces you to kneel without choice. You cannot serve, only obey, and someone who initially, from the point of view of the Emperor, was destined to do it. And then they're going to see this is what you wanted. Do you like it? And then they're even going to go, not really. But for Lorgar, that is where the ultimate weakness comes into play, where he goes, he is not really sad that he has been treated like this, but because his God rejected him. So in a way, it is okay that a god, or someone he perceives as a god, treats him like this. He accepts it, even as the chaos gods treat him. And his need is like, but I was meant to be someone special. Why are you taking that away from me? I need to find it again. Well, the phrase that really sticks with Lorgar and the other legions mentioned and is so brutal is when the Emperor says, even taking into account the World Eaters and the Curse of Conrad. And this is purely due to speed, but it is such a savage statement. He says, you are the only legionary who has failed me and everyone. And yes, it takes him a long time to say that. There are two other things I wanted to mention because they are interesting. Lorgar slaps Malcador at the beginning, and Malcador is more or less fine after that, which is very. Yes, it is like if. And, in fact, he acts like Gandalf. He invokes his staff, which is pretty cool. Yes, so he gets up, and then he also slaps them and throws them to the ground, and Guilliman is like, are you done yet? I think he lets him go because he knows that he understands that Lorgar's worldview is collapsing, and that someone, either they build something great from it or they retreat to something else to fill that void, which I think is what we will see Lorgar do. I do not remember in which book it is mentioned, but it is mentioned in. But Lorgar and Magnus are very good friends. They are very close, and he mentions that they talk late into the night about divinity, about the gods, and they debate philosophy and all that kind of thing. Well, I think about the idea that each of the Primarchs is designed to do something, to represent something. I think Lorgar is destined to be the philosophical nature of the Emperor, and I think he exemplifies it quite well. So I could see the Emperor gently pushing Lorgar the right way by putting Magnus in front of him and saying, "No, look, Magnus." He specifically mentions that Magnus was, Lorgar's shooter, but do you understand what I mean? Yes, well, the Primarch, yes, exactly, has to instruct when the Emperor is fat, when he finds Lorgar in the cultures. Magnus is there, exactly, and so, mentor, that's it. Each Primarch is mentor to another person like Cornrow Curse. His mentor was Grim Lorgar. His mentor, I'm pretty sure it was Max. I know from a conversation that Magnus and Lorgar have a last conversation before things get really ugly in Calcus, and Erebus and Corferent have already started whispering in Lorgar's ear, and yes, exactly like Webster Law, the guy does not like anyone. Everyone likes Horus because he is Horus, but Logan basically only likes Magnus. And the reason that works so well for him is because Lorgar now has this logic that all the planets we go to worship a god, and almost all of them seem to follow some kind of theism, you know? And that means that it cannot be that there's no god out there somewhere if all these civilizations end up worshiping him, and there are so many parallels and similarities throughout the galaxy. And he knows that Magnus, of course, of all the sons of the Emperor, is a great expert in the realm of the warp and in what exists under our reality. And Magnus refuses to hand over his armor, because Magnus is very loyal to the Emperor and loves him very much. So he does not give Lorgar the information he wants to know, and Lorgar is very offended. And one of the things that Magnus also says, and I would love to see more about this in the future if they ever want to expand on it, is that Magnus reveals that there's been a small debate, like a big debate, or that the Emperor has gone to several Primarchs individually and asked them what to do with Laga. And Magnus reveals that he and Leman Russ defended Lorgar before the Emperor, and this, of course, surprises Lorgar a lot, because he does not think Russell likes him. So he's like, hey, that is really surprising, and of course, you know how fun it is that Magnus and Leman Russ are on the same side. It is objectively quite interesting, and I think one thing that is good to mention here, because it will come out later in the heresy, is that Lorgar also reveals, I think Whipsy mentioned it before, that he actually has a great psychic gift. He is one of the most psychically gifted Primarchs, but he does not really realize it when he is young, and it is not entirely clear, but it could even be that he is almost at the level of Magnus. But due to his strictly religious education, it manifests in that way and in his oratory skill instead of as Magnus did. But without a doubt, you know, that Magnus could talk to the Emperor for years before they met. In theory, actually Lorgar, in a way, saw the Emperor long before they met. So it is interesting. It is also interesting that he and Magnus, in a way, suffer from the same defect since they both need answers. Some of the Primarchs simply settle for nothing. You know, the lion simply serves, and that is it, while Magnus did the same when he said, you know, the Emperor told him not to look. Magnus looked, and although it is quite interesting now how, when Lorgar says to him, will you share that same information with me? He replies, no, I do not think it is necessarily loyalty to the Emperor. I think it is because he thinks he cannot handle it because, again, as much as they are friends, Lorgar is considered the weakest of all the Primarchs. And especially now that the guys are in such a vulnerable state after, basically, their worldview has been shattered with Erebus and Corfair. And they're saying, oh, you know, everything's going to get better. There are actually other things in the universe. The Emperor is hiding things from you. So I think it is interesting that Magnus, I think Laura is angry with him because, like you're pissing me off. You do not trust me with the secrets. Why do you know them? Does the Emperor trust you? Does the Emperor tell you the secrets? But not us. So it is a bit interesting. You know, there are things happening like they are betraying me, which is his victimhood again. It is like, you know, you've been hurt. I have been hurt. So I would deviate a little from that to go back to someone we were talking about a second ago, talking about how Leman Russ was on Lorgar's side for a moment. I think there's something that many people underestimate and that I think Lorgar himself portrays well in the books. And that is how popular Lorgar is, because we talk about him as the people's favorite, especially the people of the Empire love him, but also the Astartes. There are many examples of Astartes when they talk about the different Primarchs. There is an example of, was it one of the World Eaters? When they talk about Ongron, they compare his anger to that of other Primarchs, and one of those they mention is Lorgar, and they say that Lorgar has that majesty, that oratory skill, that when you see him, you want to kneel before him. that he inspires people in that way. And, in comparison to Post, he has that majesty, that oratory skill, that when you see him, you want to kneel before him. And that is something that is reflected very well in the Lorgar books. He has that majesty. He has that oratory skill. When you see him, you want to fall to your knees, and he inspires people in that way. And, in comparison to Post, yes, he looks a lot like Post in many ways, and that actually goes back to something that happens in the Gilman Primarch novel. It happens right after the Ultramarines have gone to Monarchia, and it is how the Ultramarines deal with what they have done. And one of the things Gilman says is, I hope my brilliant brother Lorca find his way. He respects Lorca a lot. I think he personally likes him, but Lorgar does not know or understand it, simply because of how he has been treated as a child. I do not think it is very easy for him to conceptualize that people love him, but yes, in the actions that the Emperor has taken against him and going back, I think in the way Magnus was chosen to be his mentor, in the way he has had quite a bit of contact with other Primarchs, such as in, what is it called? It is Thousand Sons, where there are conflicts between Magnus and Russ, and whoever gets in the way, Lorgar puts his hand on both of their chests and says, no, we are not going to fight today, and they both respect him. They both say, okay. So I think he has had a lot of contact with the Primarchs. With the other Primarchs, he has had this mentorship, and I think the fact that they treat him like that is, in many ways, the straw that breaks the camel's back, something that no one feels super comfortable with, and then he reacts very badly to that. It is almost as if they like him, but he's like the younger brother. He is they're the older brothers. Yes, the younger brother, I agree with that, but the one they think is spoiled. Yes, we like it, but you're not ready. Yes. You're not prepared for this. Sorry, brother. The other relationship that was really interesting was that of Ferrus Manus, who is the one who makes the Macy wheels, and who becomes the template on which all the craziest arcanes are based. And it is a very funny scene because Ferrus is like, he summons Look at the Forge, and Lorgar is very kind, and he says to him, hey, Ferrus is dying. And Ferrus replies, well, I did not mean that I needed your help, but thank you for coming the other day when we were in that battle. And Logan says to him, you're my brother, do not worry. And he replies, yes, anyway, I did not need your help, but here is a mace that I have made for you, and look, I keep it as a treasure. And it is like, oh, wonderful. And if he always uses it, and it is so hard. It really feels like a younger brother vibes. Yes, it's like, oh, this guy, I do not know why I hate him. I just do not like him, Mom. Do I have to take Logan to the battle with me? Yes, if he does very well. So you can keep it afterwards. Yes, but let's continue with the story. Lorgar has this idea that there's something ancient, like from the Terror and the myths, called pilgrimage, and many other planets have it. And I will go on a pilgrimage, and they end up on a place you will have heard of because it is called Cadia, and they do not go alone. It is very famous, so after Monarchia, to make sure that the word-bearers are kept at bay and stop spreading religion, the Emperor sends, I think, 10 custodians with them, which is a source of much friction. This is where Lorgar really starts to lose control. There is a moment when the word-bearers have a meeting, and there are a lot of wrong words, and the custodians are in the room, and the law says, oh, sorry, do you mind leaving? It is like a family matter, do you mind? Sorry, do you want to be here for this? And the custodians actually, I'm going to stay. I'm just going to stay and I'm going to watch. And it is like, yes, well, or you could leave. It is like, or I could stay. And then, can you all point your bolters at the custodians? And the custodians say, I am leaving. Can you leave? It is as if he could have killed the janitors at that moment. And that would not have proven his loyalty to the Emperor, even if he could have proven the existence of some kind of benevolent divine being. I imagine it is not the best logic on Lorgar's part. And another wild thing they do on this pilgrimage, of course, is that they have to accept that those religious wars that I mentioned before that take place in cultures were in a way a mistake because they fought in them for this war, and what eventually became emperor worship. And that is not true. So is the religion they exterminated really the true religion? That is pretty bad. And this is whispered in his ear by Erebus and Corfair. We must say that it is a logo. He is not pulling it out of nowhere. It is like, he has had a good tantrum and he is thinking, I have nothing to base my worldview on. I have literally nothing. You feel that he has no soul, and obviously you have had a good tantrum and are thinking, I have nothing on which to base my vision of the world. I have nothing. I literally have nothing. You feel that he has no soul, and it is obvious that his friend and his adoptive father have left. Maybe you could fill that with something else. And there is, maybe you should investigate that pilgrimage. There are interesting things to see there, and it is obvious that we know where, but it is very funny because, from his point of view, he is the pioneer, the one who undertakes the journey to discover something, while everyone else tells him, yes, yes, you're the first, of course, friend. Yes, yes, you are guiding us. God always talks about the truth at this stage of his life. He just wants the truth. He wants to find it annoyingly. Yes, yes, what is the truth? It does not have a complete definition. I mean, in the end, he discovers the truth of the universe. And I was trying to think of a suitable example, which would literally be like discovering that the gods are not real, but that hell exists. So imagine that you or I, or you, discover that hell is a place that exists and that you go there when you die, but that heaven does not exist and that God does not exist either. What would you do? Well, there's a great phrase from the book. It is as if we discovered that God is real and hates us. I thought, oh, that is a quote. I mean, if I were from hell, I would probably leave Florida and go back to Earth. It is interesting to think about it because, obviously, if you're new to Warhammer, Cadia becomes the fortress that starts Gilman's return and is close to the Eye of Terror. But I guess that technically, in Muhammad, they have always considered the world of Davin, where Horus fell, as the beginning of the heresy. I guess Cadia is, in reality, where the heresy began. It is like the true origin of, basically, the fall of the empire or also the putrefaction, the rot of the empire. I guess so. Oh, yes, I definitely think it would be valid if we go back a bit. Although there's one thing that many people forget when looking at the lore of the Wordbearers, and it is this book. I'm trying to remember the name. Let's see if I can find it in a second. But it is the one in which the Wordbearers attack that planet, and the planet that has that dreadnought with the word bearish, Wordbearer. That book is very important for the lore of the Wordbearers, specifically because one of the Wordbearers, who is more on the military side, as opposed to the religious side, talks about why he is still in the Legion, why he's still with everything, and basically says, look, we do not like to do these things, we do not want to be the way we are, but we have to do it, because we have discovered what the universe is really like. If you discovered that the devil is a person who exists, and that if you die, you will be at his mercy, of course you would try to do things that please him and do not anger him. And that is exactly what they do in their world. Do you understand? It is what they would consider the truth, right? Yes, but they are right. It is a fact, if you know what I mean. This would be a weird link here. Do you know Caramelsa from Dustin? Go on. There's a reference to that. Obviously, the brothers are talking and how I think Warner Brothers comes to the conclusion that maybe God exists, but I do not like him and I reject him. He rejects him in that way. I think it is the word carry again, the kind of moral choice that comes from God, you know? For them, the gods are real, in quotation marks. Something is true or a fact. So it is a fact that our chaos gods are the truth of the universe and are the straight path. That is where you go. That is where they make that decision. That is their weakness. And that is why they're evil, in my opinion, because they're faithful to themselves. That is the real choice. No one else is corrupted. They choose to be like that. I would not even say that they are corrupt because there is something inside them that is not twisted. It is more like they do not want to, voluntarily enter hell. And, a good person in quotation marks does not voluntarily choose that. You can often make a bad decision or have an accident. But this is like I'm going to be bad. I'm going to see. I do not agree with you on that. And the reason I do not agree with you is because the word barriers essentially have the curse of knowledge. Because I think one thing we forget as people who read about this universe and who read all the books, etc., is that people in this universe know nothing about these things, like how people fall into chaos. They do not know that chaos exists, and therefore, they follow a cult because it offers them something. If they're in a hive world, this cult can offer them more food or better accommodation or something that gets them out of the terrible situation they are in. They do not know, yes, something like that. But they do not know that chaos fundamentally exists. So when they fall, many of them do not know what is happening. While the word bearers have been given this knowledge that these warp entities exist, that when you die, souls exist, and your soul will be torn from you and devoured by a demon in the war. Nobody, or very few people outside the word-bearers in the Imperium, know that, not even approximately, or following that logic. If the Emperor are two subcommanders who went through the Moloch Gate and discovered exactly the same knowledge, why did he not fall? Even if necessarily what is gained, which implies that knowledge through chaos is therefore equivalent to following it, you could still say that you do not choose to do it. I mean, in fact, Baal is a good example of someone who says, yes, I know you're real, but it is just that, looking at chaos, I think, yes, you're nothing, friend, and I do not.